it makes the meeting so much more productive. And at the end, you feel like you really got some stuff done. It wasn't just 6 people sitting around this table moaning about other things.
Hello, Suzanne.
Hi, Rick. How are you this
I'm good. How are you?
morning?
You can scooch over closer if you want. So it's your second time on the podcast, right?
Yes.
We don't have to hold hands or anything.
Okay, that's good. But it's not my first time on a real podcast.
Oh, no, you're pretty much a pro podcaster now. I get that.
I am.
I totally get that.
I am. I've been invited
So if anybody
as a
out
guest.
there wants a really super attractive, smart person on their podcast, call me. If you want someone else, call Suzanne.
Oh,
I'm
snap.
kidding. Clearly, the brains and beauty of the operation are sitting right next to me.
Right.
But anyway, if you guys don't know Suzanne, she's my business partner. She's our chief operating officer, pretty much overall baller. I have to twist her arm to get on the podcast because she's always like, I got shit to do. You know,
Right.
What are we doing? What do you want me to do here?
No time for jokes.
That's right. No time for jokes. No time for any of that. But speaking of jokes, we don't do dad jokes anymore.
Okay.
The new year is strange factoids.
I love it.
Do you have one for me?
So, did you know that babies are born with 300 bones in their bodies, but adults only have 206?
What happens to the extra
I
bones?
don't know. I knew you were going to ask me that.
Do they eat them?
I don't know. No, I don't know if they dissolve or if they kind of converge into.
Turn into one, like bunch of bones turn into less bones?
So I just looked that up and I'm going to figure out. I'm going to do a little research later.
I'm sure someone listening's like, duh, and they know the answer. But you know what? So what? We're busy. We don't have time for baby bones.
Exactly.
So,
Did you also know that your ears never stop growing?
I did, because every time I'm behind someone and they're going really slow, I can look at their profile through their back window, and they usually have giant ears, which means they're really old.
Really old.
Right. I'm glad I have small ears because as I get older, they're going to get bigger, but they won't be like disproportionately huge.
Like
right?
Dumbo ears?
Yeah, that would be rough. If you already have Dumbo ears and then you age with those ears, they're going to be ginormous.
And your nose hairs grow faster when you're
Well, I've
old,
noticed
too.
that already. I got to get in there at least once a week, hack those things down. It does suck. I've got this circular nose hair thing, and if the batteries get low, it just grabs and pulls them out, which makes your eyes water. Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So you got to have its blades going quick.
Be careful about that, and you can get some folliculitis up there.
I've had that before.
I remember.
I know, yeah.
I've known you way too long.
God, like so many stories. It's ridiculous. So, geologists used a confocal laser microscope to look at the surface of an IHOP pancake.
Oh.
And then they overlaid that with the contours and the landscape of the state of Kansas. So it is actually true that the state of Kansas is flatter than a pancake. How about that?
I believe that because I've driven across the state of Kansas
Yes, 430
a few times.
something miles
And
of the
it's
same
straight,
thing.
I-70. You could just
I think I've fallen asleep on the ride and woken
think
up
you
like
can.
an hour later and I'm still in the
Right.
same lane going in the same direction. It's like the weirdest thing. If you have cruise control, you just literally just take a nap.
Oh, wow. So that's interesting. I wonder why somebody would do that with a pancake.
I mean, I don't know. There must be some government funding. It sounds like they have too much time on their
Oh,
hands.
God, that's probably, and too much money.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's talk
All right.
about what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So we recently implemented what, Suzanne?
EOS.
Right.
Which
So
stands for
Entrepreneurial Operating System. So for those of you guys that haven't heard of it, a lot of you guys have heard of the book Traction, which is based on the EOS system. We had all read it. I had read it a couple times historically, and I know a lot of good business people implement Traction.
Mm-hmm.
There is a step further than that, which is the person that created the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS, that was behind the book, has an actual coaching system. I think there's like 16,000 businesses worldwide that are on it right now.
Okay.
Most of the businesses are medium size, so 2 to 10 million in revenue, 10 to 250 employees. But there are companies that have 500 million in revenue and 600 employees that are on it as well. So, and what it essentially is, I think, is just a framework or scaffolding for accountability ultimately and how to structure your business. Would you agree?
I would agree. Yes, I would. And I think when we first started looking at this, I was kind of questioning whether or not we were ready, whether we needed it. We've got a very small team. There's only 6 of us. So we're kind of under the minimum number of employees. We don't have lots of departments and directors and things like that. So I'm like, is this just a distraction to keep us busy? But I have changed my mind since then.
Yeah, and I'm glad because I was the one that brought the initiative to us, and the reason I was inspired to do it was there's someone I really respect in the franchise space. They are a company that they buy brands and put them under their banner.
Yep.
And they've got like maybe 10 brands now. They're mostly in home services, but I really like the founder. He's a great guy. He exited a business in his 30s for a lot of money and just a really sharp guy. And they use it. So not only do they use it corporately, which is what we're doing, but they teach it to their franchisees.
Right.
And then when they're communicating with franchisees, they're speaking the same language
Right.
around this sort of framework, if you will.
Yep.
And so everybody, though, to your credit, everybody on the team was like, we don't need it. This is what we already do. We've all read Traction. We already get it. This is what we're going to do. But I think there's some lessons and stuff that I've listened to since that go along with like implementing it with a local implementer that have spoken to the same place where we were, where we're like, not really sure. And the advice was like, well, listen, you're going to hate it at first, then you're going to like it, and then you're going to feel like you could never live without it. And I feel like we're kind of in that, we're starting to see like the results of it, right? Because at first you're like, well, this is just busy work. Like we have to change our meeting structure. We have to do all these things. It's like, no, it's really important. And you start to see the value of it. And then eventually as we scale our business, and this is kind of why I think I'm glad that we're doing it now is because it's a framework to then plug people into as you grow,
right?
As opposed to like letting it get messy and then trying to recoup and shuffle people around and fix it, right?
Yes.
So it's probably a bit early, but I think like a lot of things that we've done in the franchise, it's smart to get ahead of it. Do you agree?
I do agree. I do. And I can already see some of the advantages. We've only just had the two weekly level 10 meetings. And both of them were a little bit lumpy, but because we're kind of getting accustomed to the new cadence and how we how the meetings are run. But at the same time, already I can see everybody thinking, our weekly meeting is tomorrow. I have these to-dos. Are they done? Because there's accountability. You sit around this table and you report to all your teammates. And if you've got a bunch of things on your to-do list and they're not done, then you've got to explain that. So it does kind of stay in the back of your mind like, I've got to check on this. I can't let that go. I'm going to do all of those things. And the other thing that I love, and our EA Chamberlain, who's amazing, who runs the meeting, keeps everybody on track, because it's really easy to start talking about an issue, a difficulty or a challenge, and then just go off in the weeds about that instead of saying, we're going to table that.
What do they call this? I'm still going to push this closer.
IDS.
No, they call them, was it not rants? But, oh, jeez.
Is it go? It's like a gopher hole. No,
gopher hole.
That's what it reminds me.
Suzanne's great at that, at these little sayings, right?
God, I have a gift.
She leads a gift horse to water. That's all I'm going to say.
It's as clear as the writing on your face.
Yeah, exactly. A million of those. We could do a whole podcast on just
I think
funny
it's like
sayings.
It's like a form of dyslexia or something.
It's weird because you're like, you have the best vocabulary of anyone I've ever met. You're so well read, and I'm like,
I couldn't make those up if I tried. And there's just like some
clearly it's not a sign of intelligence, because I know all of those really well, except for maybe one or two, and I'm not that smart. So.
Yeah, you are.
But essentially, it's tangents is the word that we're looking for, and you'll run down.
Yes.
Everybody does it, and it's sort of like bleeds from one subject to the other. So, but before we get into that, because we're already getting in the weeds, like let's zoom out. Like, what is EOS really like in its essence? What are the blocks of it that we can give people, and why we think they're important?
So first off, like on a higher level, there are company rocks. And these are, we sat down for an entire day at the end of December as a team and listed out what are the, say, 3 or 4 most important things to our company right now.
We do that and that's a 90-day window,
every 90
right?
days.
Yep.
Every 90 days. So those are called company rocks, and you identify those. And that's really kind of your high level focus. And then each person on the team also has personal rocks, the things that they are responsible for, that they carry, if you will. Usually there's KPIs around those, and it's very clear of what their role is and what they're responsible for. So it's kind of a way to keep everybody focused and accountable, but in a really respectful way. Like there's no blame or, like it provides a framework for discussion and to keep people on track, not going down these tangents, not getting sidetracked for something that doesn't have anything to do with anything. And so that's the basic premise of it. And then you have these companies, a company scorecard, and then you obviously have your accountability list of your rocks and all the to-do things that need to be done in order to accomplish the goal.
Right. And the way the overall structure is set up, and this is very specific to EOS, and you think about like, can you shoehorn this system into a company if you already have a corporate structure? Because some people already have an org chart, right?
Right.
Now, the suggestion from the founder is that you change your org chart to match EOS just so that you can run the system with integrity. But essentially, you've got an overreaching individual that would be like a visionary, right? And the visionary is like, I think the rocks that they have that they give examples like 20 ideas a day, based on feelings, not logic. I mean, there's some things that like that person is wired to do, and it's like those are their strengths, right?
Right. The CEO usually that is.
Yeah, like founder, CEO, whatever that may be. And then underneath that, there's the integrator, right? And the integrator is the one who takes all those ideas and whatever and puts them into action and makes sure that they happen. So imagine like, vertically stacked, you've got like your idea, and this comes from like rocket fuel and everything else.
Sure.
You got an idea person, you got an implementer, right?
Yep.
So in this case, they called it an integrator. The name of that person, it could be COO, it could be brand president. I mean, that could be CEO, and the one over them could be like founder president. I mean, there's just interchangeable terms, but like one is the person with a lot of ideas. The other person's the one who enjoys daily process, getting things done, is responsible for the P&Ls of the business. Like they're the ones that are really running the business essentially. And then underneath that, there's just three blocks, right? There's sales and marketing.
Right.
And I think in our company, we split those out, but typically it's just one block called sales and marketing. You've got then operations.
Right.
And then you've got finance.
Right.
And so those are the three. And so if you think about like if just a leadership meeting only would typically have the visionary, the integrator, maybe someone in charge of sales, someone in charge of marketing, so that's two more people, right? Someone in charge of operations, so a VP of ops type of individual,
Right.
and then someone in charge of finance,
finance.
right? And those would be your leadership meetings.
Right.
And then those individuals would go and then have individual meetings with their teams that mirrored the same cadence, right?
Yep.
And so the meeting cadence is once a week. Again, so let's zoom out. Like, so the bigger meeting cadence is if you're running the real EOS system, once a year you do a 2-day full-on meeting where you just make sure it's the idea that everybody can put their head down and be working really fast, but if no one ever climbs the tree and looks around and sees like, hey, where are we going next? You could be foresting, right? But you're just like blasting through the woods. Are you going the right direction? It's like you need to take a step back from your business every now and then, make sure you're headed in the same direction.
Yep.
So 2 days out of the year, you do one annual strategy meeting, 2 days. And then each quarter you do an offsite 1 day. And this is just with the leadership team, right? And then you have your weekly meeting cadence. And that's, they have it set aside for 90 minutes. I think right now we're at 60. But a 90-minute meeting, and there's a certain cadence and flow to that. And we can talk about that. And then those individuals, that's just for the leadership team. And the leadership team takes that information and they have a weekly meeting with their teams and do the same kind of structure.
Right. The comms and all that.
Everybody has a rock. Everybody's got, all the things, all the parts and pieces of the meeting. So ultimately I look at it as a giant accountability tool and a who's doing what, right?
Yep.
And it's interesting, like we have a small, relatively competitive team, and our core values lined up perfectly. Like one of the core values of EOS is keep it simple, which was ours already, which was really nice. But I think, what they do say is be careful, like implementing this, not be careful, but it's something to look out for. There are going to be people that are, especially if you're a big company, say you have 300 employees, there's people in your company that aren't really productive and they're maybe hiding out. So this is an ultimate accountability tool.
Oh, right.
Some people are going to love it and they're going to see it as like you're investing in them and you can recognize the work that they're doing. It's important. And I think that's the way you want people on your team.
Yeah.
If you have people on your team that are not necessarily that accountable and they're not doing a great job, they're not going to like it. Right. Because it's going to really expose them.
Yes.
Not in a negative way, but it's like, boy, they're going to have rocks and each meeting they're going to show up with their to-do list and nothing's getting done. You don't even have to say anything. They're going to self-select out of the company because at the end of the day, they're not carrying their rocks or their weight, so to speak. So that's the overall flow of it. That's the general structure. We could talk about how we're using it corporately, but I want to break down like the actual meeting cadence and how that goes. So if you just read the book Traction and just start down this road, great. if you plan on hiring an implementer, I think it's a franchise or what have you. I think EOS is. I'm not sure. Put it this way: each individual EOS coach is regional. So, like the one that we're using is just specific to our area of Atlanta. If you want one and you're in a different city, you'll have to go hire them. It's relatively expensive. It's going to be anywhere between. I think they can set their own pricing, but they have some standards. We're paying like between $4,000 and $5,000 a month, right? And they're coaching us corporately, and they're working with our franchisees. And we'll talk about how we're doing that. But let's start out with like, all right, you read the book Traction. Where do you get started? I think the main thing is the weekly meetings.
Yeah, the level 10 meetings.
Yeah, level 10 meetings as they're called. So I forgot the structure of that. Do you have that in your head?
So you start out going around the room and talk about something either good or bad, either personally or professionally that's going on, like a prop.
Right. Yeah, we do props. So it's like something that we've seen somebody else do, or just something that maybe their attitude's been great or whatever that is, right?
Correct.
But there's times on these, and this is real important.
Right.
Like you're not just there to do open discussion. Everyone hates meetings that are a waste of time. So
it's just 5 minutes.
It's 5 minutes, and somebody starts the clock, and when it's over, and you move on.
Yep.
If it's not done. So, okay, we start with, like, we do props, but let's just say something personal that's going on that's good in your life.
Right. So you go around the room, and then you talk about, you look at your company scorecard, or the things that were on the list last week, and we pull that up, and we use just a Google sheet to keep track, and we go around the room, and everybody reports either done or not done. Really, that's it.
Right.
That's 5 minutes.
Right. And so your scorecard is like, what are the things that you're working on right now? Your scorecard relates then to your rock, which is an objective that you have for the next 90 days. Right.
Yep.
So let's think about examples in our business. Do you have any examples you can think of for us? Like, I know, like we've got a team that's just dedicated to like getting clubs open, right? So we might say like a percentage of our clubs that are on track because we've got SOPs and different steps that are happening. Like, okay, you're looking at sites by this date, that date. And so we can look at like percentage of franchisees that are out of our cadence on all of those things, right? And that would be that team's idea. And then within that, there's 3 people on that team. So they might be drilling down and looking at even more metrics, right?
Exactly. So, but going around the table for that 5 minutes, we're not talking about if it's not done, why or what. We're not breaking all of that down. It's just like you go down the list and it's either done or not done.
Right. Yes or no.
Yes or no.
Yes. You're either on track or you're off.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. So, and then after that, we go around and we talk about specific things that each person is working on. If it's not done already, if it's done, then it's off the list. But if it's still kind of a work in progress, not on track or not done, then they add those back onto the list. That's so Chamberlain's creating this list, a new list, then which will be the springboard for next week.
Right.
Here is everybody's list. If there, at this point in time, there may be things that come up. We call them issues. And we drop those down. We don't sit there and spend a bunch of time because remember, this is just a 5-minute thing. We don't talk about the specifics of those. We just drop it down and add it to the issues list. And then the last part of the meeting, and it's the majority, it's like the 40 minutes, is going through and working and discussing those issues.
Right. So, and this is so different than most meetings where you go around the room and somebody brings up an issue and then we go on a tangent.
Correct.
And then it ends up being you talking about, it starts out here and then it's sales, then it's marketing, then it's like this, then it's real estate. And it's like, and then you're off on this tangent and people are just complaining essentially. So it's like, okay, did you get your work done or not? No. Okay, great. Is this a thing? Does it need to be moved down to the issues list? And then things get moved down. And then when you get to the section of your meeting where you've covered your niceties, are you on track or not this week? If you're not on track, why? And does it need to go down to an issues list? Not Correct. An excuse, but like, Correct. Okay, yes or no? Okay, this is an issue. Goes down to the issues list. When you get to the issues, that's the bulk of the meeting. Mm-hmm. You rank the issues, which is really important because you can't talk about everything, right? You rank them 1st to 5th or whatever, and you typically end up with like 3 to 6, issues, right? And you're not going to solve them all, believe me. And you pick the one that's the biggest priority, and then you do what they call IDS, which is identify it, discuss it, and solve it, right? So it's like, okay, what is the real problem here? Because sometimes when it makes it to an issue list, it's not necessarily the surface issue. There's a reason why.
Right.
You're trying to identify the reason that this is an issue. You discuss it as a group, right? And then you come up with a solve for it. And that typically will then give marching orders to people on the team, to-dos or whatever those things are for the next week, right?
Yep. And that's the best part of the meeting is the IDSing, is working through things. And I will say we've only had 2 of these meetings, but the way that the meeting is set up is so important because we would go off on tangents numerous times. And then Chamberlain or you were really good at saying, okay, tangent, pulls everybody back. And that is, you can see how often that would happen.
Well, it was weird. I never noticed it until we actually started measuring the time and identifying tangents.
Right.
And then it became really clear that we're doing them all the time.
Rabbit hole, whatever.
Right. And I think we're all really good at that, right? Gopher hole. Yeah. I think we're all really good at that. So, we all think we're doing these really productive meetings, but you set a time limit on it and a structure, and it's like all of a sudden it's like, geez, most people's meetings are probably just tangents with no solve,
100%,
right?
100%.
So once you say, okay, no tangents, and everyone's like, oop, my bad, and the team's respectful of each other and the process that we're trying to run, push it down into an issue, then you identify, you discuss it as a group, and you solve it, and those are ranked, like most important to least, you think, right? And then you solve it. And so it's just a completely different framework for a meeting. So what happens at the very, very end? Is there something else that happens after that? Is there like a parting part of the meeting? Like at the end, there's like a 5-minute departure part?
I don't think so. At least we didn't do that last week.
Yeah, I think there is. We probably look, we're new to it as well, but.
Oh, no, you are. You're right. There is like a brief recap.
Right. Recap of the meeting, and then there's the to-do recaps, like the homework for everyone.
Exactly. And whoever's running the meeting does a very brief recap. And it's not like a repeat of the whole meeting. It's just like the things that we IDS'd, and everybody's got their marching orders. And they're on that Google Sheet, which is shared between the team. So, if you're not a good note taker or you missed something, it's very easy to see what you're responsible for and what you need to achieve.
Right. So the key is like there is some software that EOS offers, and there's a couple of tools you can use. We're just using a basic Google Sheet so we can all share it really easily. And it seems to work really well. Certainly for our size organization, it's great.
Yeah.
But then there's a recap of the meeting with the to-do list and who's doing what, and everybody gets to see it. So again, just the leadership team is seeing it, and then beyond that, each leader is running their team in the same way.
Right.
So again, it's ultimate clarity. Everybody knows what their responsibilities are. Everybody has their marching orders. And then you have to report in next week. Right. And just keep in mind, I think when you hear like, okay, we moved something down from I didn't get it done. Why? Okay, well, so is that an issue? Yes. Okay, so then quit talking about it. Let's get to that in the next section, right? Because that's typically when you just go down these rabbit holes. Move it down to the issues list. Some of the issues are not going to be solved like immediately. Like we've got some overreaching things in a big, like franchising is a monster, right? So there's things that need to be improved. They're not going to move off the issues list.
No.
They may make it on there, for weeks and weeks at a time, but we keep solving parts and pieces of it, right? Until eventually it's off of our list.
100%.
The thing is, the organization of it also, again, I've only been in on one of the meetings. It just feels more organized. You don't feel like you're sitting in there wasting time, right?
Right. And it doesn't become just a gigantic bitch session or gripe session.
Right.
Where, and that can happen very easily. People get frustrated. It's like, we've got all these extensions of our team, vendors that we use and whatnot. People can get really frustrated because you're not in control necessarily of the entire process. And it's hard to deal with sometimes. But I think even that part is getting better because we can assign to-dos to certain people to hold other people accountable, to check in with them, to make sure that they're managing that piece of things, even that's outside the organization. So it makes the meeting so much more productive. And at the end, you feel like you really got some stuff done. It wasn't just 6 people sitting around this table moaning about other things.
Right. And as much as we're positive and we would call each other on that, it just happens. It's just human nature.
It does.
Because who else are you going to talk to about it? You're not going to go home and talk to your spouse. So it's like, here's your teammates. Here's some things we need to work on.
Right.
What are we doing? And it would just go from one to the other to the other. And I know for me, because I'm high level, it's like, I hate getting pulled into the weeds. I would just be sitting there thinking, this is just the worst meeting ever. These are very organized, and there's a structure to it. And you need to, and it's a key that what Suzanne said earlier is really important, you guys, is that you appoint somebody to run the meeting. and you have to like let them run the meeting. So if they're like time's up, that means time's up. Like no more talking about that. If it's an issue, it makes it down, zip it, right? Next thing. So, I mean, obviously Chamberlain, if you've met her, she's perfect at doing that.
Yeah.
But you need that person to keep you organized. So you mentioned vendors, and I think it's interesting. You know, what we decided was that our vendors are an extension of our team.
100%.
So why can't we take the same meeting structure, because we have lots of meetings with vendors. So we have a real estate meeting, we have a construction meeting with our construction vendor, a marketing meeting. So why don't we take the same structure that we're using in our meetings and use that structure for our vendor meetings, because they are extensions of us. So we're starting to implement that as well, and I think that'll really help, because you know, you've got 10 people in a meeting. And there's a lot of things that are in state of flux at any given time, especially with like real estate and you know, construction. It's like having a to-do list and then sending a recap to the team on all the things that people are supposed to be doing and needs to be done by next week. It's a great accountability tool for everyone involved. Otherwise, every week it's like, oh, I told so-and-so with this company and they never got back to me. And then they never got back to me. And then I heard from them, but they didn't have it right. It's like, well, if they're on the meeting, explain to them that you're going to be running a different framework of a meeting, that you're going to have a to-do list, and then you're going to expect them to get their to-do list done by the next meeting.
Right.
There's no reason why, even though they don't work for you necessarily, you are working together. It's a very productive way to run a meeting. So why not do it that way, right?
100%. Yeah. And so it's only been a couple of weeks since we've been doing this, and already the whole team is enjoying it, because there were some naysayers. You know, we're all different personalities, and we've got some optimists. Like I'm an optimist. So I'm the one that would die in the prison camp. But there are other people on our team who are kind of more like negative Nellies or little Eeyores. So they're but already
it just sounds like
it's just more work
that we have to do.
Right. But already it's working for them, and it's working for the whole team. So pretty soon, I think it will become second nature. And so when we're at that place where we are scaling, and it's not going to be long because we're growing fast, and we're adding more leadership members to the team, or we're trying to figure out who to add when, all of this will make that process much easier, and we'll be ready.
Yeah, and if you're a small company like we are, it'll be an eye-opener the first time you do the exercise. You don't even put names in the boxes. You just identify what the functions of those boxes are. Then you go back and put names in them, and then you find out pretty soon, like you and I were in like every box, right? It's like, wow, wonder what the choke point of the company is. Probably you and I. So then you start saying, wow, if we want to build some layers, like, and we're at that stage anyway, where it's like, all right, like the next few hires will be critical for us. So, but it allows us to have a scaffolding where we can easily plug and play. Right. And that's key. So when you look at it, if you're in the fitness space, we say, well, how would you apply this to a small fitness business? It's the same thing. So first of all, have a weekly meeting. I think that's key. You know, like if we're talking to franchisees and they're like a low performance at the time or they're struggling, and I guarantee you they're not having their weekly meetings. And we like have your weekly meeting, and the things that we're going to hear are the same things that I used to say.
It's so small.
Well, it doesn't really matter. I see them every day anyway. We're always seeing each other. It's like, no. There is a very distinct reason why you have this weekly meeting, and use the same framework, right? Use just, you know, you can change it a bit to fit the business, but like if you've got an issue with clients showing up late, as an example, okay, so it moves down to the issues list, and then you identify why that's happening, discuss how you're going to, you know, like solve it, and then come up with a solve. Like, okay, this is what we're going to do to get clients to show up on time. Whatever those things are, there's a million little parts to a fitness business. I like the fact that there's accountability, because like if you look at our model, it has 3 employees, right? You might have 2 full-timers or like a full-timer and 2 part-timers. It's like, okay, how are you going to hold your part-timer that works 2 nights a week accountable to run the play? And we have all these soft touch systems built out, like 7, you know, the 7 steps to or the 7 tenets of a great session, right? It's like, okay, cool. Well, you could build like their to-dos and their scorecards off of that. So when you're meeting each week, you know, one example would be like, all right, you send a text to anybody that did something good in the workout. Maybe you could tell they were feeling a bit off. Is everything okay? Or a brand new customer, right? So you could just give a part-time coach a score of 5, and like, what is that? It's like, okay, so at the end of each of your shifts, you send out at least 5 text messages to clients for various reasons, right? So when you met with them next week, it's like, did you 5 or not, right?
And it's a
yes or no, right? So it's like, that's what it's about. And the end result of that, those are like the leading behaviors, if you will. So we talk about KPIs, you
Yep.
got leading and lagging.
Yeah.
So leading is like, okay, these are behaviors that I'm doing every day so that the director and then ultimately the investor get the result they want, which is obviously from something like that, better retention,
Sure.
better customer satisfaction,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, okay, they all lead to the same thing, but you need to have a basic structure and a framework around it.
100%. I'm excited about giving that to our franchisees. So we happen to have franchisees in this week training, and this afternoon is their first our first foray into our coach, our local coach, who's coaching us corporately, introducing our franchisees. These are the owners and the operators, and sometimes the director of training, who are at training week, to introduce them to the whole idea. And the reason I love this so much is that a lot of people come to us who are from corporate America, or they've been a business or a teacher, or they're not business people. They've never owned their own
Entrepreneurs,
business.
specifically.
So this is kind of teaches them what to expect and how to think, because you have to think differently. This is your baby. This is your business. And nobody else is going to take care of it like you do. So
Right.
We've noticed in the couple years that we've been franchising that sometimes, the investors, if you will come in and they'll put the money up and they'll hire the people, and hopefully they're the right people, and then they're kind of hands off. But you have to be involved in your business.
Right. So show up, what kind of involvement? It's like, well, first of all, you need to show up for your team. They need to feel like they're supported. This is something we talk about ad nauseum now based on experience thus far. It's like, all right, well, show up to your weekly meetings, right? Hold everyone accountable. Just being present, and they know that you care enough to be there to support the business, right? That's all. You don't have to spend 20 hours a week there.
No.
You're not servicing revenue, but you need to show up and be a good leader. And part of being a good leader is being available to the people that are working
Right.
with you and running these type of meetings. Like, accountability is a way to care for people, right?
Right.
So holding them accountable shows that you're paying attention to the business and to paying attention to them, which is super important. And so for us, it's really twofold. And I think there's only one other franchise that's doing it at this point, because when we hired our local EOS implementer, he had never heard of someone doing it for a franchise. It's typically much simpler if there's just one layer. You're just running a business that just does business in a local market or a market. But for us, it's like, well, we're doing it corporately for our accountability, but we're also implementing it for franchisees. So if you're thinking about being an Alloy franchisee, what a great asset. It's like, not only are we going to teach you how to run an Alloy, we're actually going to teach you how to think and operate like an entrepreneur, because that's what you are at the end of the day. And we do that we do a monthly call for investors, right? So that as we bring new investors on, they can listen to the call, and it sets up the framework. We lean heavily into the hiring process, because that's
Right.
typically what's going to come next for them. Yeah. And then when you come live to training, it won't only be you, but you're bringing your operator here, and your operator is going to be the face of your business. A lot of these operators, you guys, they have their own aspirations of being entrepreneurs someday, and maybe they'll be your regional manager when you get 6 Alloys open or something. So part of the allure for them and what you should be advertising to them if you're looking at an Alloy is that I'm going to give you the tools to learn to become an entrepreneur. So maybe you've got a young individual that's very talented, but they don't have the financial wherewithal to buy their own Alloy.
Right.
So they're going to come work for you. Well, I think everybody that is in a business, if your vision is big enough for the people on your team, for their vision to fit under your vision, you're going to attract good people, right?
Yeah.
So you got to have a big vision, right? Even if it's big enough for this one location.
Right.
And then you're going to give them tools so that they can realize their own vision.
Right.
Part of that is learning to be a good entrepreneur.
It's such a value add.
Right.
It really is.
So a monthly call, and then we're doing live training when you guys come to training, and that will be for you and or your operator if you're an investor. So it's a great tool. I mean, we're loving it. Again, one of my most respected buddies that's in the industry, they do a great job, and they do it. So it's like, why not emulate the best
Right.
of the best, right?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And not everything fits exactly. We've had to,
Right.
tweak a bit of things because, like you said, we're applying this corporately to our business, but then we've got these franchisees, which is kind of a whole nother business. So we're finding a way to make it work. But I think it's a fantastic way of running a business, keeping people accountable in a respectful and kind of graceful way. And it's such a value add to franchisees. I hope they appreciate how generous we are.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not cheap, and it's difficult for us to put it in there. And I think, for as young as we are to franchising, we're as experienced in business overall as
Right.
we are young to franchising.
Right.
So when you look at us like, oh, it's an emerging franchise, it's like, look, dude, and Matt and I did a whole podcast on this last week. We have a preferred employment organization, like basically full benefits package.
Right.
We're teaching you how to be an entrepreneur with a proven system that's worked worldwide for 15, 20 years.
Yep.
I mean, we have all these assets in place,
Yeah.
right, to help
Yeah.
people. And that's not usual. So it's hard if you've never purchased a franchise or partnered or been awarded a franchise to understand everything that's in place. But it's a pretty big deal. So I'm proud that we're able to offer it. And I hope that our franchisees appreciate it, like you said, and take advantage of it.
I think so. And I think that the proof will be in the pudding, because we will develop better franchisees, better leaders. We'll have successful franchisees. And at the end of the day, that's what we want.
Word. I think we'll leave it at that. Good to have you back on.
You're welcome.